to bottom, right? So that the strongest kind of white collar workers who are being paid the most, like the programmers, will be in the same union as like the kitchen staff. And the idea is that through that solidarity, they'll be able to get the best gains for everybody. And that has sort of happened in some cases in academia, but not as much because unfortunately, you really, I don't think you see too much awareness of the need for organization on the part of tenure track faculty. Most of the organizing that I've seen in academia, it is actually adjuncts and contingent labor and graduate students, and they're sticking their necks out. And yeah, tenured faculty are not really, and that's not as it should be.
Yeah, I think with tenured faculty or tenure track faculty, I think there is typically they don't start complaining until something starts affecting them. And I think that this is just kind of human nature often, that people, they don't see a problem until the problem starts affecting them. And then it's too late. Mm-hmm. Right? I mean, by then, other people have already been affected. And now once it gets to people who have some amount of job security and benefits, once it's there, you're screwed.
Yeah. I think you're totally right that part of it is just people kind of going la, 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 sticking their fingers in their ears and thinking, I still have my health insurance. I still have my, full-time salary. I don't need to put in the work for this. But I also think that, at least with younger academics who are tenure track or just like me recently getting tenure, it's a scary situation because we know how replaceable we are. And we know that in many cases our institutions would be more than happy to actually replace us with adjuncts, not even just replace us with one of the hundreds and hundreds of other people who could do our jobs on the market, but actually just even take away that line. And so I do think that part of it is, and I'm not saying this to excuse it, I think this in some ways is even worse, it's knowing what's happening and also being maybe too afraid to organize. And it's always going to be an issue because people don't organize for their rights until their backs against the wall. It's something people do when they really need to. So it's always going to be scary and it's always going to be time consuming. And, you might lose your job.
Well, yeah. I mean, in the example of that tech company in the DC area, they're trying to organize and everybody gets fired. That becomes, an example for everyone else to not organize, or you see what might happen to you.
Yeah. I think that's definitely the way the company intended it and hoped that it would go. But I think that they misjudged the situation because now the people who, at least 2 or 3 of the people who were fired, they have become these labor organizing firebrands, and they're out there doing far more than they would have done if they had just gotten their union and continued to work at the company. So the company tried to solve this problem in one small instance for themselves, but they sort of unleashed the whirlwind,
That's great to hear, though. I mean, hopefully that can, be a positive change in the industry.
I hope so. I think so, yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about feminist intersectionality in science and technology. Mm-hmm. How far do we still have to go on this? I think people are becoming more aware of the impact of women of color and non-binary people and trans people and, people who have been othered within science and technology and in computing. But is it basically still like a white, tech dude bro game? I have a lot of friends who live up in the Bay Area and it's just like tech bros everywhere.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, that's such an interesting question. And it's so important because if we look at, just the history of this country, race and the oppression of Black people, they are foundational. They are foundational to pretty much everything in this country. And, the infrastructure of tech carries that legacy. It's no exception. It's not like these are problems from the past. And so it's not a coincidence. I don't think it's a coincidence that so many of the people who are doing really important tech critique, like Sophia Noble, like Meredith Broussard, like Simone Brown, like Ruha Benjamin, that those are all Black women, I don't think that's not a coincidence. But, it's actually something that is really important to pay attention to, because these women are better placed than most of the rest of us to understand what's going on by virtue of their experiences as Black women in the country. And even if you look at computer science, which is disproportionately white, there are a lot of Black women and women of color in computer science who are addressing issues of algorithmic bias in a head-on way, while, major corporations are still kind of trying to weasel out of it and say like, oh no, it doesn't really exist. Or we didn't intend that, so therefore we're not going to take responsibility for it. So yeah, I think intersectionality is absolutely critical to everything that's going on now and how we understand it, because race and Blackness is so critical to understanding systems of oppression and overlapping systems of oppression in this country.
To what degree, and this, I didn't prepare this question for you, and so I'm just kind of coming up with it off the top of my head right now, but how much has globalization also impacted labor in IT?
Yeah, I was thinking about that while you were talking about the white tech bros in San Francisco, and I didn't...
Because it's another aspect of this, like, intersectionality and race and class and gender and status. Yeah.
And labor being treated better or treated worse. So, we all know about outsourcing, right? Where basically, jobs that might have been done in the United States, and these include tech jobs, they go to, for instance, India, and companies get to pay people less to do them. But what I think people are less attuned to, maybe not all people, certainly, but sometimes we forget that there are an awful lot of people, for instance, from India or from China or other countries, but in particular from India, who are here in Silicon Valley and in tech, in Research Triangle Park, in the Boston area, wherever there are tech hubs. There are people who come over on H-1B visas. These are these skilled visas that the idea is we don't have enough people to do these jobs in the U.S., so we actually have to import this very high skill labor. And when folks like that come in, several of my friends are actually originally from India, and they came here on H-1B visas, and some are actually still on those visas waiting for years and years for their green card or years and years for citizenship. They aren't treated as well or paid as well in many cases as their white male tech bro peers. But more and more, they're defining the industry. I mean, they're doing the work, they're growing in number, and, you can't ignore the fact that the tech bro, I don't want to call it an ideal, I guess the tech bro stereotype, that really isn't the face of tech. Yes, we have problems with there being too many like white men in positions of power. But if you start to look down the management chain and look at people who aren't in positions of power, but who are doing the work, it gets more and more diverse. And that's one of the reasons why I think so many people are trying to turn to like labor organization, because they see that management is not who they are and not on their side.
So I guess, the next step would be that, as people start retiring, late Gen Xers or early Gen Xers, late baby boomers start retiring, and these like white men who are in these positions of power start retiring, that maybe we'll see more diversity in these kind of upper level management positions.
I mean, I would love that to be the case, but like historically, that's not really what happens, right? Because in fact, if we look at who's in these positions of power. Mark Zuckerberg isn't that old. He's younger by a lot than me. People who are being groomed for these positions of power, who have a particular profile, like, all the people who are getting all the venture capital money, they all are, no coincidence, pretty much white dudes. And they're the ones being given blank checks to, go off and change the world. And so this is a system that's perpetuating. It's not like it's going to be solved kind of in an easy generational shift sort of way. And also, going back to what we were talking about with adjunct laborers and then tying that into like a parallel to H-1B visa workers, one of the reasons that tech companies really like hiring H-1B visa workers is because if your ability to stay in the country is tied to your work visa, you're not going to engage in like labor organization activity.
Of course not.
You're not going to be somebody who has, you're not going to be able to do that sort of thing because you will have to leave the country. You will get kicked out of the country if you lose your job. It's all tied to your work visa. So I guess what I'm saying is, history is always a story of struggle, right? Not evolutionary change. And that struggle is, I don't want to say it's part of the fun, but it's part of the process. It's what we have to do. And so I think we're now with the techlash and everything, we're sort of waking up to the fact that, oh yeah, the digital age is going to involve the same sort of struggle as the industrial age. And we're going to have to put in the work because we aren't just going to magically end up in like, a computerized utopia where we are, cared for by robots and nobody has to work.
Yeah, that actually terrifies me. The idea of like computers taking over everything. Have you seen the TV show Travelers?
No.
Okay. It's on Netflix. They're not making any more seasons of it. So if you wanted to binge it, you could. But basically people from the future, future is a terrible dystopian wasteland. And so they send people back to the past in order to try and change it. And so they do make changes, but the person who is sending them I say it's in quotes because the director is a computer who is making these decisions about like what needs to change and who needs to go back and what needs to happen. So like a computer is deciding how the future needs to change for the better. Now people have programmed this computer obviously, but like you can this the algorithm, like all of it is like, none of it is like value neutral, and essentially nothing ends up actually changing because like it's all going to turn to hell. It's not really uplifting. It's terrible.
Wow. Yeah. I started watching, I guess it was on one of the streaming services, and it was like this Philip K. Dick's Electric Dreams, sort of like,
oh yeah,
little sci-fi series. And I can't watch Black Mirror. I will take like a leap off a tall building. But I tried watching this, and it was really good. The one I watched had like Steve Buscemi in, and it was really well acted, and the sets were really good and everything. And it was similarly like, it was just this dystopian nightmare warning, which was so close to our current context. It's like, I can't watch this. This is just depressing, So, I've been going for sort of the lighter fare, which doesn't necessarily show us how, utopia is a fiction, but maybe gives us a little bit of, I don't know, ideas about how we can be more imaginative about problem solving. And sometimes also I just watch trash.
Yeah, sure. Speaking of like dystopian visions of what Silicon Valley looks like, have you seen Silicon Valley, the TV show?
I have not.
Yeah, you don't want to watch that.
Okay. Yeah,
it would make you so angry.
Oh man, yeah. People always ask me like, "Hey, do you watch the Bletchley Circle, or do you watch this or that show that's really close to your work?" And I'm like, "No," and I never will, because for me that would be like work,
Yes. Yeah. No, I feel like Silicon Valley is, it's a comedy, obviously, but it's so representative of everything that's kind of wrong with Silicon Valley that it makes me. It's really cringeworthy and makes me kind of angry sometimes.
Oh man, that is rough. But I will say, just to kind of like make things maybe a little less depressing, most of the people that I know, and of course, obviously this is like a self-selecting group, but most of the people I know, and I do know a lot of folks who work in tech, they are there are men and women and non-binary people. What I was going to say is there are men on the inside, like they have the same values that I think a lot of folks outside of tech making these critiques do. And it's just we all get trapped by these systems, right? Like whether we're on the tenure track or an adjunct or an H-1B visa worker or somebody who's working in tech, we get trapped by these systems. And in order to function, we have to go along with them to a certain extent. And then we also, in order not to lose our souls, we have to resist them. So I'm skeptical, but somewhat hopeful that we are heading into a period where we're going to actually try to address some of these big problems.
That's a good place to end, actually. That like there are people on the inside who are resisting. They are like persisting in their desire to make tech a better place, a more inclusive place. And hopefully we can learn from the past and make the future of like computing and technology, the technology space, better for all people and not just white dude tech bros.
I hope so. I hope so.
Cool. Well, thank you